Hello, my name is Agnieszka Pikulicka-Wilczewska and this is Turan Tales, a podcast about Central Asia. It delves into stories of people, politics, social change and more, and is part of my newsletter which you can support on Substack. Welcome and be my guest in the journey to Central Asia. Hi listeners. In the nomadic societies of Central Asia, among the Kyrgyz and the Kazakhs, there existed a social role fulfilled by poets, musicians, and improvisers. They not only created witty punchlines on the spot for the entertainment of the people, but also served as mediators between ordinary folk and their rulers. Akyns could say more than others. They could criticize rulers' decisions and sing about the problems facing common people, in the hope of improving their communities. Akyns still perform in both Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. In the former, however, some have redefined their role over the past several years by joining media organizations. They transform journalistic investigations into poems and songs to bring them to wider audiences. Several of them have ended up behind bars because of their work. This week, we discuss the craft of akyns and aitysh, their poetic duels. We look at the history of the art form, its historical functions, and how these have changed during the Soviet era and since the collapse of the USSR. We also examine the social significance of aitysh and the differences between traditional akyns and those who have turned to journalism. Joining us is Akylai Otkulbek kyzy, a Kyrgyz researcher who focuses on aitysh as a living civic and epistemological practice. She holds an MA degree in International Public Policy from the University of Tsukuba, Japan, and an MA from the OSCE Academy in Bishkek. Welcome to Turan Talks. Hi, Akylai. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation.
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me to your podcast.
So let's start from the very basic question. Who is an akyn?
So an akyn is an improvisational poet who performs his songs on the spot, and his songs or her songs are very contextual, very much tied to the location, to the people, to the history of the community. And akyns are usually Kyrgyz or Kazakh or ethnic minorities of Kazakh and Kyrgyz ethnicities in Central Asia, for example, in Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, or China's Xinjiang area. And these people, when they perform, when they sing, they do it in front of an audience while playing a musical instrument. In Kyrgyz case, it would be komuz. In Kazakh case, it would be dombra. So these people, they are regarded very highly in their community because they are sort of the voice of the people. They see themselves and people see them as this bridge, people who connect the common folk to the decision makers. So this is what akyn is.
Where does this tradition come from? Do we know where it began and what was the geographical span of this tradition?
It's very hard to pinpoint where exactly this tradition came from and how it originated because of its nature. It's fully oral, it's verbal, and it was transmitted and the knowledge was transferred only orally. And because of the nomadic lifestyle, aitysh is very much rooted in nomadic lifestyle. This is why it's very hard to find written evidence when it was originated. But some sources say that it dates back to 5th till 8th century, so between that time period. And in terms of geographical span, so it's mostly Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and among ethnic minorities in Central Asia and also Xinjiang. Also, the tradition of aitysh itself is a poetic duel between two akyns. So they duel with each other in front of an audience on a platform, and aitysh is very much different. It has transformed. Pre-Soviet, Soviet, and post-Soviet aitysh has its distinct features.
Let's start from explaining what was the function of it and of akyns in the pre-Soviet times.
So as I previously mentioned, they served as bridges, not only between people, the decision makers and the common folk or the rulers and the ruled, but also geographically between villages. So akyns were those who traveled with their musical instruments, visited village after village, and they would sing songs, tell stories, pass on some lessons, and they would be sort of these vessels for collective memory. And because people had to store knowledge somewhere, because they didn't have written means, they perfected the oral form of knowledge. This is why they would concentrate on that. So one of the functions of akyns would be to disseminate news, stories, lessons, history. So that's one of the functions. Another would be to act as moral guides, to teach people, to tell decision makers the grievances of the people openly, without any punishment. Also, another function would be to be the watchdogs of the society. So to tell the failures that decision makers are missing, to address. So they would be sort of these neutral people who are observing the state of the society and then reporting on it.
So they would serve as the kind of democratic watchdogs over what's happening in societies. Let's maybe talk about what it looked like in practice, because in the pre-Soviet times, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan were nomadic societies. So people changed locations. They also didn't really have a sedentary life. So how this all worked, how nomadic societies functioned at the time, and why they needed somebody like an akyn to function.
Since people lived in tribes and they lived pretty far from each other, and akyns would travel from these communities and sort of connect them with the knowledge, with the stories. And when akyn would come to, let's say, a shepherd, and in the evenings they would sort of seek some sort of entertainment, and akyn would be a perfect example for that. And they would entertain these people by singing, by telling them different stories, what is happening in the very distant villages, and then connecting them to each other, creating this mental field for everyone. So this is how it was in pre-Soviet times. In daily life, this would function like that, but during celebrations, when different people from different places would come to one place, then akyns would be sort of the highlight of the event, the center. And then different akyns would come, and then they would battle and duel with each other and gather hundreds of people around them. So yeah, this what aitysh has been like in pre-Soviet, before 1918.
So aitysh would be this battle between akyns. What would be the songs or the stories that they were telling? What were they talking about? And what was the battle about? You know, if somebody won, what was the prize?
So it's very interesting because their topics are what they decide to talk about, to sing about, can be anything. It's everything and anything, but mostly it revolves around topics of humor, satire, entertainment. They can tease each other jokingly. They can even insult each other in subtle ways. They always convey messages between the lines, so it's very poetic. It's not just straightforward and direct, but it's full of punchlines. And they can also discuss very important political or social, economic, anything that is happening in the community. So anything contextual can also make its way into the content of akyns songs. And if it's a female akyn and a male akyn, most of their content, the speeches, the songs will be revolving around courtship and romance and love and these types of topics, because this is what entertains the public, the audience. And it's still very popular. Every time there is a male and female akyn, the topics always go in that direction. And about the prize. So the prize, this could be a certain number of sheep. It could be, back then it's sheep, but now it's millions of soms. This is the main prize. I think it's 1 million or 2 million som, around that area. There has been an aitysh I think 2 weeks ago in Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan, and the price was around 2 million, I think. And Kyrgyzstan's prize structure is a bit different than Kazakhs. They give 2 first prizes. So 1 Kyrgyz, 1 Kazakh.
Let's stay a little bit in the pre-Soviet times. Tell me, is this the way that the epos of Manas was preserved throughout the centuries? And if it is, maybe we can tell our listeners a little bit more about what it is and what is its function or role in Kyrgyzstan's history and society and culture.
So Manas is the longest epic in the world. Some say it's the second, but nonetheless, it's very massive number of lines about a national hero. His name is Manas, and he is the ideal, perfect hero who united many Kyrgyz tribes and then made one nation. So if you visit Kyrgyzstan, you can see the sculpture of Manas, you can see the elements and features mentioned of Manas everywhere in the nation-building strategy of Kyrgyz nation. Manas has a very big, significant role to play in nation-building and national identity of Kyrgyz people. And in pre-Soviet time, Manaschis, they can also be considered as akyns, but they don't participate in aitysh, in the poetic duels. They have only Manas, which is their framework, and they tell only Manas epic. So this is how it's been. It's very important to mention the Soviet period, if you're talking about Manas, because during the Soviet era, Manas was targeted to be removed from traditional art form to be practiced so openly, but local scholars, they defended it. They said everything in Manas, how it talks about foreign oppressors or local oppressors, it resonates, it mirrors the feelings of the working class and proletariat. And they decided to keep Manas, and it was still practiced in Soviet era and then after that.
Okay, so what happened to akyns and aitysh after the Russian colonialism and during the Soviet times?
During the 1920s and 1930s, there has been a state-sponsored traditionalism when the state tried to co-opt the traditional art forms and make them work for Soviet ideology. This is when the party members recognized the authority of akyns and they tried to involve them to disseminate propaganda and Soviet ideology. And akyns did that, and the vehicle for this propaganda was called culture houses, Soviet culture clubs. So there were dozens and hundreds all over Central Asia, and the activities that were conducted in those houses were various. For example, political hearings, but mostly concerts. Sometimes they would organize aitysh, but aitysh would be strictly performative right before the main concert. So it would last only 5-10 minutes between two akyns. And then when they sang songs, they would always include Soviet elements into it, like the labor plans and how the village is doing good in that terms. And then they would congratulate and encourage them to do better. And this is how it would be. So it was the format sort of stayed, but the content was very different.
So what happened after the collapse of the Soviet Union? Because we know that the collapse of the Soviet Union brought the resurgence of culture, of traditions that were previously forgotten, and the nation-building processes began. So what happened with akyns? What happened with the tradition of aitysh then?
In the context of Kyrgyzstan, after the Soviet Union collapsed, the traditional art form, aitysh, has been in a very poor state. And this is why a public figure, his name is Sadık Shirniyaz, he decided to revive this art form. And he founded a aitysh public fund. And this has shaped the contemporary aitysh now. And he invited the 4 legendary akyns that were practicing akyndic skill, the skill of improvisational poetry at the end of Soviet colonialism and during the independence years. So they served as mentors for the young people. So they mentored, they taught, they passed on the skills to the new generation. And this is how it flourished. So we can say that in post-Soviet Kyrgyzstan, aitysh has been growing in popularity. It has been attracting lots of audiences, and right now we can see that the audience of aitysh in Kyrgyzstan is getting younger. So a decade ago, the primary audience would be people who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s and older, but now we can see people in their 20s also attending aitysh concerts. Also, international and interregional aitysh competitions started to take place as well since the independence.
Tell me more about those international competitions. So would it be Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan? And how important these competitions would be for local populations and for the public?
You guessed it right. It's always between Kyrgyz and Kazakh, but sometimes the citizenship of the akyns who are performing can be a little different because some of the akyns are ethnic minorities that are coming from China or Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, but all of them are Kyrgyz and Kazakh. Kazakhs speak in Kazakh, Kyrgyz speak in Kyrgyz, and they battle in their own local languages, but they understand each other perfectly. And the international aitysh is always more popular than the local one. And when they sing, they mostly employ the national symbols, the points in time when Kyrgyz and Kazakh tribes did something together. Maybe some grievances can be mentioned as well. Also, since these people are from different areas, they always mention the histories and the context of their own location, of their own cities, and this is how they enrich the content of aitysh. So both Kazakh and Kyrgyz.
In those international competitions, the content of aitysh is mostly historical, or do they also mention some contemporary grievances or contemporary problems?
It's different every time. For example, the last aitysh I have attended, Kazakhs have visited Kyrgyz aitysh, and when that happens, they mostly try to praise everything that is Kyrgyz. And when Kyrgyz go to Kazakhstan, they also try to be nicer there. And what they sing about is always different. Sometimes they remember the previous grievances, but mostly it revolves around contemporary issues. For example, they can mention the traffic jams of Kyrgyz cars that are at the border of Kyrgyz and Kazakh border. And then they will...
That's a very busy border.
Yes.
Takes ages to cross sometimes by car.
Exactly. And then they urge for an action. They say, why don't you do something about that? There is no traffic on our side. Why are you doing that? And they will mention those things. And sometimes the topics can revolve about economy, how well Kazakhstan is doing or how Kyrgyzstan is doing in some other areas. So it will be lots of comparisons in political, economic, and cultural areas. But mostly they will try to use these differences and similarities strategically to win this battle. If they want the audience to cheer, they will mostly stress the similarities.
Kutman menen turatın narıktan salva sakında bular oy tavuğun üçün ırdaşat.
So, who decides about the winner? Is it the audience? Is it like a jury, a point system? How does it work?
So before the structure was introduced to aitysh, it was always the audience, it was always the people and their reactions. And the reaction of the common people is very important in aitysh because this is how akyns know that they are saying something that resonates with the people. And that can also be a strong driver that indicates who is the winner. So in the past, people would decide who would be the winner by cheering, by applauding, by reacting or shouting out some short phrases. But now we have formal judges with point systems, and now every aitysh is dedicated to a memory of a public figure or anniversary of a city, for example, or some other important event. And I heard that one of the criteria is to actually mention the public figure or the anniversary. So not to completely ignore the main reason for gathering, they have to at least dedicate some lines to the public figure or anniversary.
That's the international aitysh. Local as well. Okay, right. So local aitysh is also like a big event, as I understood. So what is the social function of aitysh? Is there, social or political significance of aitysh today?
This is a very important question because if we look into the academic literature, aitysh is mostly studied as folklore, as a Central Asian song format or a form of communication or a foundation of nomadic lifestyle. But aitysh in my opinion, is much more than that. It has also some social functions. For example, I have studied it for my thesis, the first one being public therapy. Sometimes when there are collective trauma or problems that people are going through, such as low wages or air pollution, corruption, or anything like that, akyns will try to mention that. But when they do that, they don't try to urge for an action. They simply acknowledge it, recognize it, to make people feel heard and seen in their pain. So I noticed that element of aitysh. And the second one is social order. aitysh as a platform is very dynamic, and every akyn will try to call for some certain social order and some norms, be it gender or some political. They will try to teach people how to live in some way. For example, they can talk about the relationship between children and parents and sing about what an ideal parent should be like, what an ideal son or daughter should be like, and then they will try to promote those norms, those gender roles, for example. And this is not to say that this is set in stone. Other akyns can also join and challenge these norms. This is why it's a very dynamic process. Everyone can bring some arguments, and then this is how the battle gets even more interesting. So yes, the second meaning being social order. The third one is aitysh also is a sort of instrument for nation building and sort of urging for a certain vision. Usually nation building happens top down, but in case of akyns, they are self-appointed advocacy. It's like bottom-up nation building, and then they try to envision a certain future and then call people to go in that direction. And when they do that, they always employ symbolic language, national identity, to some features. They always mention manas. For example, they can talk about the future of Kyrgyzstan using only the parts of a yurt, for example. They might say the defense of a yurt, it's called kerege in Kyrgyz, and then they might say, let our kerege expand, which means let our population increase. So, and then people will immediately get what they are talking about. And this is how we can see that there are so many symbols in their language as well, in encoded language.
Hey, quick little break. Thanks for listening to Turan Tales. We're a tiny independent show supported by listeners like you. If you like our work, you can get a paid subscription at turantales.substack.com/subscribe or buymeacoffee.com/turantales. Okay, back to the episode. How one becomes an akyn? Are there any schools, or people just find this gift inside themselves, or maybe they need a mentor? How does it work contemporarily? And also how it worked before traditionally?
Traditionally, it was Ustad-Shagird relationship, so mentor-mentee relationship. They would seek a mentor and ask to work for them, to be taught by them. But now, it hasn't changed that much. I have interviewed akyns and I asked them, how did you learn it? And all of them said it started when they were, let's say, children, or when they were in their teenage years. They felt this calling to be an akyn, and they always talk about akyndic skill as if it's a God-given gift. They say it's a calling. It's much more than a hobby or profession. It's like a mission for a lifetime. And they seek mentors. They come to this aitysh public fund, the one that I have mentioned, that organizes these aitysh concerts. So they go there and then they search for mentors there. The more institutionalized ways of learning to be an akyn, there has been a bachelor's degree in akyndic skill, if I'm not mistaken. But I remember one of the interviewees saying that they wanted to go there, apply, but the group was too small, so it was later, they had to close the group. So there has been no graduate from that particular program. So we see that there's still a space for more support from government, I would say, to help akyns educationally with the degrees and mentorship.
So what kind of skills does an akyn need? are they basically poets? So is it skills related to writing and poetry, or is it singing? Or is it something like, rap battles to come up with something very spontaneously and may create great metaphors? So what kind of skills does someone need to become an akyn?
You are completely right. They would need the skill, the ability to come up with rhymes, with the right words, with the right punchlines quickly. So they have very agile minds. They are extremely eloquent. They are all Kyrgyz speakers and they have mastered the language. They would need the skills of playing komuz in various ways, know several melodies on komuz, critical thinking as well. Akyns are very hard to... I have heard that when people try to make them sort of an advocacy group, like, can you please sing about this one, about our political party, or about this issue, or about this organization, or our embassy, they would not do that. They are very stubborn because they decide for themselves what to sing about. This is why they have the public trust. So they do have critical thinking. They are very skilled in joking. If it's a skill, I don't know, but they are very good at humor, at generating punchlines and jokes.
That's definitely a skill, I'm sure, yeah.
Yes, I was thinking about history. They also would need not so much as a skill, but knowledge on history, on Kyrgyz philosophy, history. They all want to mention some historical aspects that happened in our community. So, yes.
So are there any akyns that became, let's say, stars in Kyrgyzstan or Kazakhstan who are so popular that people would, particularly praise them or particularly listen to them as commentators of the reality?
For that, I would have to mention the four legendary akyns that have shaped the contemporary aitysh right now. So 4 of them being Estebes Tursunaliyev, Asrali Aytaliyev, Zamirbek Usunbayev, and Tuanbay Abdiyev. So out of 4 of them, 3 were alive during the 90s, and then they were the mentors of the current akyns. So these 4 are the founders of current aitysh that kept akyndyk alive during Soviet colonialism. And if we talk about the latest decade, the most popular akyns, one name comes to my mind is Akylai Otkulbek. He has publicly criticized the president live in front of thousands of people and thousands of people online as well during COVID times. He has raised the issue of corruption in a healthcare system. This was very big topic of discussion, and since then he hasn't been actively performing as an akyn, and he doesn't participate in aitysh nowadays because the arrests are also increasing among akyns, which is an unprecedented case.
Before we get to that, I wanted to ask you about this political meaning of akyns. So we know that Kyrgyzstan has been through 3 revolutions over the past, since 2005, so 20 years. And have akyns played any role in these revolutions or during the upheaval or after revolutions? Like, what was the social function in the times of crises?
I don't think they played a role as big as activists played during revolutions, because when you ask an akyn, do you consider yourself an activist? They will all say no. They do not like the word activist, because this word is very negatively charged in Kyrgyz political environment, because activist means for them that it's an individual who is against the state. And they try to intentionally position themselves between the state and the people. So even in their language, they are not very harsh when they criticize the decision makers. They still remain polite and diplomatic, and they also convey messages like between the lines. It's very subtle. So they try to be this connecting bridge for these 2 people. So I would say they would urge to the decision makers and the people for a dialogue. Like, let's not do this. Let's do this. So yeah, it's almost like we are one. So they try not to divide This is what I have noticed from the interviews with akyns.
So akyns generally don't want to position themselves as political actors or activists. But then at the same time, there are people who describe themselves as akyns, and they're part of like different media projects. For example, Temirov Live, I think, had somebody who described himself as akyn. How do you see these people? Do you think they are akyns, or is their role a little bit different from the traditional understanding of the word?
I think in terms of the skill set, they are still akyns. When I ask the akyns of the traditional sense, they say to be an akyn means also to shape the style of their language in a certain way. They say akyns should not be as direct as investigative journalists, for example, to have accusatory tone when conveying messages. They say we have to keep in mind that we still would have to cooperate with the state, with the government, with the decision makers in the future. So they have these things in mind, and then this influences their speech as well. They say the speech is the biggest difference between akyns who are in media and akyns who are only in aitysh environment. This has been the major difference.
Let's stop for a second on the topic of those akyns who work with the media. Can you tell us a little bit more about this process? Because it's not one person. There are actually quite a few people who do that. So can you maybe briefly sketch out this group? Who are these people and how do they work? How do they convey their messages?
So those who work for media channels, for example, I haven't interviewed them properly. So my main pool of interviewees are the akyns who engage in the traditional aitysh. So I'm not very confident in saying, but these akyns, as I said, they are very much passionate about finding the corruption schemes, for example, letting people know that these people are, let's say, stealing money from the budget, from taxpayers' money. And so they are very passionate about justice feature of akınlık mission. When you watch aitysh, you can notice that entertainment is the dominant, is like 70-80% of the content of an akyn, and then the remaining 20%, 10% is mostly about political or social issues or topics. But akyns who talk only about political things, they are the ones who get mostly targeted and arrested.
What they do basically is in this form of a song or a form of a poem, they talk about their investigations as journalists. Is that correct? Am I, explaining it correctly?
As far as I know, yes. And also I have seen them recording videos of them just talking as well. Mm-hmm. They can still be called akyns, but they can talk not in a song format as well. So I have seen that format as well. But mostly traditional akyns, they just sing.
Mm-hmm. So in the past 2 years, I think, or so, we have seen quite a few arrests of people who describe themselves as akyns. But were there any arrests of traditional akyns or any, backlash against traditional akyns, or is it mostly the backlash against human rights activists and the media?
Traditional akyns are also getting warned and summoned if they share a critique. So this has been extending to traditional akyns as well. This has been one of the emerging features of the contemporary aitysh in this regime, unfortunately.
Let's leave it. And I wanted to ask you if you think that the tradition of aitysh and of akyns could somehow be, used globally or by international organizations for some other purposes, maybe diplomatic purposes, because it seems that this tradition is so ingrained in the Kyrgyz culture and Kazakh culture that maybe there would be a way to make a different use of it.
I believe in this idea that global institutions could actually benefit from learning about aitysh, from maybe cooperating with akyns. But I have to stress this, that akyns should have absolute freedom and they should decide what to sing about on their own. So as one of the concrete examples of how aitysh can be used in global institutions could be the election observation missions.
Oh, okay.
Such as OSCE, Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. They do parliamentary election observation missions as well as presidential, and their report is highly valued and studied. They're very significant. And I have noticed that when they do media monitoring, they only monitor political narratives that take place in conventional media, such as TV, radio, online news portals, newspapers. They physically measure how much space a political party or candidate gets, and this is how they try to estimate who gets the most space, attention, or who has the most resources. But when they do that, they miss out on traditional platforms and forums such as aitysh. And as I said, aitysh is deeply contextual, which means anything that is happening in that location, in that time, is also reflected in aitysh songs as well. And if it's election times, they can also sing about political parties, candidates, maybe their agenda, political agenda. They can talk about whatever they consider important. So this could also be studied and taken into account. But the way they will talk about will be fully in Kyrgyz. And also it's very poetic. It needs interpreting. It needs contextual knowledge. And sometimes, as I have mentioned, the social meanings, for example, public therapy, they don't discuss all these election-related topics as journalists do. They might engage with these topics very much differently. For example, they might acknowledge and recognize people's pain regarding vote buying. For example, that people sell their votes for several thousand sum, and then they could talk about it and urge people to not do that. Or they could just simply recognize people's pain, those people who are desperate enough that are struggling financially that they have to sell their votes. They could mention it in that aspect, for example. So it needs a lot of interpreting, and it needs the local knowledge as well.
That's very interesting. Maybe it's also an idea for some journalists to focus on during the next election, whenever it is. Thank you so much, Akylai. It was fascinating to hear about akyns and about aitysh. And all the best to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It has been a pleasure to share my research with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ordulu kara bulakka başımdan 12 akın geldele.
That's it for today. Thank you for listening, and please subscribe to Turan Tales on Substack. I look forward to meeting you there and on my newsletter's social media.